Greetings, guys. My name is Sam Mahala, and I'm going to be going over Kuru. I know you guys are like, what the heck is Kuru, and who the heck is this guy? Kuru wasn't on the list, and we don't know who this guy is. I don't think he's in our class. Well, I'm the conspiracy theorist dude who sits in the back right of the corner of the class, and Kuru was not on the list because it's a little different than everything else we've done, but I did have to get special permission for it. So, Kuru is a prion disease. It is These prions are simply misfolded proteins in your brain. And these misfolded proteins cause a neurodegenerative disorder. They cause many disorders in a family of diseases called spongiform encephalopathy, and they're caused by these misformed proteins. Kuru itself is almost unheard of today. I believe the last case was in 2009, and that person was born before 1959 when the practice that transmits it was outlawed. And it was only found in a very small area of Papua New Guinea because of one of the local tribes there. So, in order to really understand how this works, we have to understand the prion. We have not gone over the prion at all since we've been in this class. We've been studying uh, viruses and bacteria. And viruses and bacteria, viruses specifically, they enter your cell and they turn your cell into a factory to make copies of itself. And a bacteria simply reproduces. Prion is not the same way. It does not reproduce at all. You have these normal proteins in your brain that are folded correctly, called a prion protein, PRPC, with the notation of C. And we don't know quite what they do today. We believe they have something to do with protection, with like helping to protect the cell, and also they might help with transmission from one neuron to the other. But there hasn't been a lot of like good seen evidence of these things happening. And what happens is these prions become misfolded and become a PRPSC. That's the standard notation for it whenever we're talking about spongiform encephalopathy. SC means scrapie, which we'll get into here in a little bit. And what happens is these prions stack together really easy, and they end up destroying the cells. What happened? So these proteins become misfolded. There's a few different ways where a protein can misfold. Usually, especially in the case of Kuru, it doesn't happen any other way except for you have to get one of those proteins into your system. But in other diseases, especially this family diseases, is kind of similar to um, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but we'll get into a little bit into that later. But so this normal protein has a higher concentration of alpha helices and a lower concentration of beta sheets on the protein. And this is like some of the structure of the protein, and it's how your DNA actually organizes it. It's how your DNA is written to create the cell like it is. And what happens is when these prions become misfolded, these proteins become misfolded, they switch, and there's a higher concentration of beta sheets instead of alpha helices. And because of this, these beta sheets are really sticky. They like to stick to one another because of a covalent bond. And what happens is these prions, these PRPSCs, will run into one of your normal proteins, and it'll cause it to misfold as well. I believe it has something to do with the beta sheets sticking to one another, and it kind of causes that normal protein to unravel a little bit. And then they just get caught up together, and they make these big like chunks. They make these big aggregates, and that causes problems in your cell. As you can see here, it creates this kind of chain reaction where you have a normal PRPC and it runs into a PRPSC, and the normal prion protein, the little circle, is is turned into a PRPSC, a prion, and then they continue to run into one another in conglomerate and aggregate, and then they end up breaking off and creating more and more of these aggregates. And this is the hallmark of a one of the diseases that we call a spongiform encephalopathy. As I said, it's a family of neurodegenerative disorders. And what happens is these conglomerates, these aggregates of prions, they create holes in your brain. These little white dots that you see here are actually dead neurons, actually clumps of dead neurons. And that gives your brain a sponge-like appearance, and that's why we call it hence spongiform. And this family includes a number of diseases, including Kuru, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD, which there are a couple different types of in humans, chronic wasting sickness in deer, scrapie in sheep, and bovine spongiform encephalopathy in cows, which is commonly known as mad cow disease. So whenever you hear people talking about mad cow disease, I know it was a big thing in Britain, I think a couple decades ago. It was a big shock because people started coming down with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease because it's one of the types of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is you get it from eating meat, usually the brain of a cow with mad cow disease. So back to Kuru, the signs and symptoms are usually a little bit different. Each one of these spongiform encephalopathies are a little bit different, but for Kuru specifically, it always starts with arm and leg pain and headaches. A lot of the elders in modern interviews with them from the Fore tribe in Papua New Guinea, they describe arm and leg pain, and headaches first, and that was really scary because it meant you might have Kuru, and it quickly goes downhill because by the first symptoms, you've already had Kuru for 20, 30, 40, 50 years at this point because it takes so long to really get to that point. And when you start having symptoms, you have 6 months to live and it will kill you. As I said, it starts with arm and leg pain and headaches. It ends up with difficulty walking, difficulty swallowing, tremors and twitching, and shaking. In fact, the word Kuru comes from the Fore word to shake. And most famously, it results in uncontrollable bouts of laughter and or crying, and it was commonly referred to as the laughing disease or the laughing sickness or even the laughing death because of it's one of those things that it does. It just makes you start laughing, and it does. It has a 100% mortality rate. If you get it, you are going to die. Now that I've scared you guys a little bit, I will scare you a little bit more and let you be a little bit relieved because in order to get it, you have to eat someone. It is the reason that it was only found in the Fore tribe of Papua New Guinea is because they had a very specific funeral rite that in which the friends and family of deceased members of the tribe would cut up, cook, and eat their bodies. And now these prion proteins can be found in very small concentrations, very rarely in the muscles. They can be found, but usually they're found in neural tissue and especially the brain. They're in massive concentrations in the brain. And this is why you really wouldn't see Kuru in the men, because the men would usually eat the tougher muscle, whereas the women and the children would eat softer tissue, including the brain. And this is why it was really big in the children. It's the first official reports of Kuru were in the 1950s as Australia started to, because they had previously Papua New Guinea was their territory, but they hadn't been like surveying the area, and so they in the 1950s as they began to survey the area, and they found these tribes, And one of these tribes, they described, some of these surveyors described a sickness, a shaking sickness that they had been seeing. Um, so by the late 20th century, it was actually in the late 50s and 60s, the Australian government banned this practice. They saw this and they wanted to instill cultural changes, but they saw this and they were like, "No, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. You guys cannot eat. You can't be eating people, guys. Jeez, come on, you can't be eating people." So it still went on for a little while, but eventually the Australian government instilled tribal leaders into the villages, and it after that the funeral practice of cannibalism was um, left. So there are a couple of uses in modern pop culture. I thought I'd give a shout out to both of these because they're really good and they're really they do it really well. They're also two of my favorites because I'm a pretty big nerd. So the one on the left here is the Book of Eli. I highly recommend you if you guys haven't watched it. It's a fantastic movie. It's a post-apocalyptic movie about this guy Eli who is carrying the last Bible. Books have been burned, and it is the last known Bible, and it's his whole thing of like carrying the fire and trying to keep the word alive. And in the Book of Eli, there are a lot of scenes where people are like, "Show me your hands," or they describe people with the shakes. And there's this one scene in particular where this Eli and his newfound companion are they run into this older couple, and they've been holding out in their house for a long time. And the older man takes the two companions, Eli and his new friend, back to the backyard, and there's a bunch of graves. And Eli, his new friend, who's played by Mila Kunis, she starts to kind of freak out, and Eli's like, "We need to get out of here." And she says, "They killed them," and Eli says, "They didn't just kill them; they ate them." So her hands, the lady's hands were shaking, and a lot of times it is described as Eli describes it as too much human meat, which, well, that's Kuru, but that's not quite the way that it works. The person you ate has to have Kuru. So, for example, people in the Donner Party didn't get Kuru because no one had Kuru. You can I don't condone cannibalism, but you can eat as much human meat as you want, and you're not going to get it unless someone has Kuru already. Um, Another one that I really find fascinating is Far Cry Primal. It's one of my favorite games as well. And there's a tribe of cannibals in the game, which they suffer from a kind of a disease called they call the skull fire, and it's very very similar to Kuru. So thank you guys for watching. There are a couple more things that I want to mention. First is this an annotated history of Kuru. I'll put these two links that I'm going to talk about in the handout for Wednesday. But I highly recommend. It's not that long of a read. It's really fascinating. It talks about how the surveyors really go into the area and start describing Kuru and things like that. And finally, I know we watched the medical detective story on the bioterror attack by the cult in Oregon. Well, there's another one on Kuru that is real fascinating. I don't think it's by the same people, but it is really interesting. It's very similar, and I'll put that one on there too. It's about an hour long. It's called Kuru: The Science and the Sorcery. It's really really interesting. It has interviews with some of the people of the tribe, and it also has interviews with one of the medical researchers who was going through it. So thank you guys very much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. I hope you guys have some good questions.